In 3 short years of the Clone Wars, Anakin Skywalker rose to the top of the leaderboards of lightsaber duelists in the entire galaxy and in galactic history even. Despite his young age, he mastered gems so beyond what most Jedi achieve in 10 years of training. This was why Anakin easily outduels any Jedi beyond the upper echelons of the High Council such as Mace Windu and Yoda. Yet there is an unlikely opponent that he consistently appears to struggle against. And that opponent is Asajj Ventress. Dooku's personal assassin was repeatedly set against Anakin and Obi-Wan during the war. While she was indeed well trained, we notice that Anakin gets knocked around by her at almost an absurd degree. She's able to outmaneuver and even overpower him on multiple occasions. This is until Anakin's patience runs out. Greetings again, lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. It's an honor to have you here today. In this holocron, we wanted to explore why Anakin seems to be weak against Asajj Ventress, at least until he simply chooses not to be. So let's begin and analyze why. When we say that Anakin is weak against Ventress, we aren't insinuating that she is somehow stronger than he is, or even that she's a better duelist. What this all comes down to is who they are as people. Specifically, Anakin's internal struggle during the Clone Wars and how Ventress affects him. This is a topic that we've wanted to talk about for a while here, and has to do with how Anakin constantly holds himself back. During his Jedi training, Anakin excelled in his combat study. It was the one area of Jedi life that he actually felt comfortable and confident in. He drilled constantly with his lightsaber, becoming a finer warrior as a Padawan than most Jedi Knights could ever dream of being. This caused Anakin to become arrogant and prideful, however, and at one point, he claimed that he knew the battlefield better than Grandmaster Yoda. When on a mission with Barriss Offee, Anakin would mention something to the effect that Yoda's teachings were fine for a classroom setting, but had little use in real applications. At the time, Barriss was offended by this arrogance. But of course, this was a young and an inexperienced Anakin that had no idea exactly what he was talking about. Unfortunately, no one at the time could really challenge Anakin and put him in his place besides Jedi Masters. But all of his confidence would change following his slaughter of the Tusken Raiders. Anakin had always been impatient to some extent. Being brash and quick to anger landed him and Obi-Wan in hot water many times during their adventures together, and Kenobi would warn Skywalker about letting his emotions drive him in battle. But Anakin would ignore all of these warnings until his anger made him commit a massacre on Tatooine. For many years, Anakin would follow what Obi-Wan said, and he would attempt to bury his anger. But Tatooine utterly broke the young Jedi. Anakin had given into his hate and killed every living thing in that camp following the death of his mother. When Anakin had danced with anger on the battlefield before and it had emboldened him and made him powerful, it was one thing. But embracing it fully on Tatooine was another. And from that point on, he became deeply ashamed of this anger. He was not very good at suppressing it the way that other Jedi did, but he did try his best to bury his feelings deep down. This inadvertently affected his performance in the Force though. He began to hold himself back substantially, worried about giving into these feelings again mid-combat. This is why he was prone to livening up battle by joking with his allies and quipping with his Padawan and enemies. The humor was to mask the deep fear of losing control in the heat of the moment. Even Ki-Adi-Mundi would comment about this, wondering how Anakin and Ahsoka could trivialize combat into a game of counting their droid kills. Anakin's weakness was also, though, reinforced by the Jedi teachings that emphasize restraint. Jedi were not supposed to exercise all of their power, only what was necessary to control a situation. But Anakin never knew where the line was drawn without giving himself into passion. And so, because he never let himself actually use all of his abilities, they remained behind locked doors. We estimate that on average, Anakin Skywalker only ever operates at maybe 60% of his real power, even though he seems to be trying his hardest. Anakin could be putting forth real effort, concerted effort, but he will always appear weaker because he can't break through those barriers, at least until he gets pushed over the edge. But here's where things get interesting. Ventress, on the other hand, had to let go of all restraint at a very early age. Ventress grew up in a gladiatorial arena, fighting for her life every single day, and when Dooku found her, she had made a practice of using the dark side to survive, even to the point of claiming Sithhood to him. Ventress was already given to her ferocity. This is something that Anakin had not experienced in an opponent when they first dueled, so he tried not to betray the Jedi teachings, and decided to engage Ventress the way that a Jedi would. But that, of course, didn't work. She immediately began to challenge him right at the core of his emotions, brutally killing each one of the clone troopers in his company. Anakin was someone who already cared deeply for each one of his troopers and their lives individually in the Force, and they had been executed without so much as a fighting chance. With his resolve already tested, Anakin found himself in a fight for his life. Sidious had ordered Ventress to kill Skywalker because he knew that she couldn't possibly be successful. Sidious did not want her to hold back. It was, of course, for this very purpose: to draw out Anakin's anger and his survival instincts. With her superior speed, athletic ability, and brutal gladiatorial experience in the arena, she was more than a match for Anakin's suppressive Jedi training. It was only until they began fighting in the ruins of the Massassi Temple did Anakin begin letting go of his restraint. The entire time she was throwing and kicking him around, but suddenly, her force pushes did nothing. Any object thrown at him was returned with greater force, and the lightsaber duel was turned on its head into a brutal affair. He beat her back to the apex of the temple, crushed her under the might of Jem'So's blows, as Ventress was sent falling into a ravine and thought dead. But this only happened because Anakin was pushed over the edge by her ferocity, and suddenly, all of the things that had made her strong against him were rendered ineffectual. This breakthrough, though, didn't last for very long. Anakin would go back to suppressing himself, worried that he had killed yet another individual out of anger. But of course, Ventress came back, and she challenged him again. In their first duel, Dooku had just plucked her out of the arena and immediately sent her off to the fight. But the next time that she and Skywalker dueled, Ventress had actually received training from Dooku. This made her faster, deadlier, more capable of keeping up with Anakin's own increasing power. And although he was rapidly gaining more strength and skill, he continued to hold back in lightsaber duels out of fear of losing himself to the darkness. But Ventress made this especially difficult for him. We believe this is also why Ventress seems to handle both Anakin and Obi-Wan at the same time effectively. Anakin is a lot more level-headed when fighting beside his master. Kenobi's calming presence reminds him to stay centered and focused. And as we said before, Anakin is operating at around 60% of our estimation of his true power. Obi-Wan's added presence makes him hold back even more out of fear of disappointing his master. This is seen on Christophas when they have 2 against 1 in their duel. Anakin tries to aggress, but he cannot let himself commit. Ventress seems to pick up on this, and makes a point to attack him directly while fending off Obi-Wan. Over the course of the Clone Wars, we notice that Anakin becomes increasingly more frustrated with Ventress. In the second Battle of Kamino, she attempts to steal a sample of the clone DNA, and Anakin is there to thwart her. They duel, and Ventress continually breaks through his guard and lands several kicks on him. He struggled to actually pin her down, but was also able to take back the DNA sample once they exited the cloning facility. By this point, Anakin starts showing the dark side of his impatience. He dislikes the effects that she has on him in battle, so he was already ready to order the clones to execute her by firing squad. Ventress escapes this time, but this begins the trend of him becoming more violent with this dark side opponent specifically. There is something about Ventress that pushes Anakin, even more than Dooku. He should crush her, but as a Jedi, he feels that he shouldn't. The two have another confrontation on Coruscant. Once again, Ventress is proving to be a significant challenge for Skywalker, and it was at this point where she administers the scar above his right eye. Ventress even mocks him, and says that the scar is to prove that she could take his head off anytime that she wants. Technically, she's correct, but only as long as Anakin is holding back. But the moment she begins to threaten Padme, Anakin loses all control. Manipulating electrical cables with the Force, Anakin restrained Ventress and began electrocuting her before dropping her down into yet another pit. Ventress, of course, though, still manages to survive, but this was the beginning of the end of her dominating Anakin in a duel. In their final duel, Skywalker was on the trail to figuring out who framed Ahsoka for the Jedi Temple bombing. Since Ventress and Ahsoka had been seen together, he interrogated her. By now it was late into the war, and Asajj was no longer Dooku's assassin, now operating as a bounty hunter. Anakin confronts her in Coruscant's lower levels. She didn't have her lightsabers at the time, and attempted to fend him off with 2 pieces of a pipe. But Skywalker was already going in without any nonsense. He destroyed her pathetic defenses, and immediately force-choked the former assassin against a wall. No amount of training, ferocity, or dark side power availed her this time. She was completely at Skywalker's mercy, only able to save herself by giving him the information that he wanted. This was the last time that the two of them ever fought. Of course, it is the last time they had reason to fight. Ventress was no longer a separatist. But this time specifically, Anakin was not joking around. He was not on a mission, and he was not alongside his master. He was out to save his Padawan. Skywalker knew that dealing with Ventress was difficult, so he bypassed all of the usual restraint and went directly into his anger. And as soon as he did, there was no more back and forth. No more of her breaking his defenses or keeping him at bay with kicks. She was dismantled in seconds and utterly helpless under his real power. And this all circles back to Anakin's internal struggle, how she had always manipulated it against him. In the end, Palpatine was correct when he said, "Anakin, I can feel your anger. It gives you focus, makes you stronger." Unlike the other Jedi, when Anakin allows himself to feel, he's not sidetracked with keeping his emotions suppressed. This frees his mind completely to concentrate on what he's after, even if his anger is with him. One might hear this and say that he was predisposed to Sith teachings, but I think it's the opposite. I think that by virtue of him being the chosen one, he was actually predisposed to using the dark side correctly in harmony with the light. His anger does give him focus, allowing him to channel that power the way that it's meant to be used. But because he's ashamed of that anger, it started pressurizing within him. So when it is released, he explodes. This was a lesson taught to him by Ventress, who fulfilled the duty that Sidious had designed for her, to push Skywalker to his very limits and to break those chains. Anakin's clashes with Ventress highlight one of the most important truths of his character. Even at his most furious, even when his emotions are boiling over in the heat of battle, Anakin is still a Jedi trained from childhood to hold back, to restrain, to avoid killing unless absolutely necessary. Against Ventress, you can see the hesitation baked into him from years of doctrine and mentorship. He punishes, he overwhelms, he batters her defenses, yet that final edge, that final intention to end her, is never fully unleashed. He is fighting with instinct and talent, but also with chains that he believes in. And that tension keeps him from accessing terrifying potential that the Force has placed inside of him. For all the power displays, for all the raw ferocity that makes him one of the greatest warriors the galaxy has ever seen, he is still holding back, still fighting at a fraction of what he could be. Palpatine understands this better than anyone. He engineered Dooku, and by extension Ventress, to be the perfect instruments to break those instincts one duel at a time. Ventress's provocations, her taunts, her unrestrained killing intent were meant to tug at the same seams of Anakin's restraint, and show him how much stronger he could be without it. Dooku's elegance and cruelty served the same purpose, forcing Anakin into emotional extremes that the Jedi feared, and through them, Palpatine created a crucible designed to teach Anakin that the Jedi way only limited him, and that his true strength lay in abandoning those teachings. And the frightening reality is that even during these battles, even when Anakin came closest to losing control, he is still operating at maybe 60% of his true latent ability. His full potential caged behind these last threads of Jedi discipline, waiting for the moment when Palpatine would finally convince him to tear those chains apart. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on our analysis, and why Anakin Skywalker was actually weak against Ventress, but maybe for not the reasons that many assume? But before you depart the archives here today, I want to hear from you. Do you think Anakin ever truly fought at his full potential before Mustafar, or was he always holding something back? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for visiting the archives today, and may the Force be with you.